Alrighty, please take your Bibles. Turn to the book of Daniel. Daniel chapter 7 got quite a bit of ground to cover today. And I hope that you have been following along with us. I make these series. I don't make these series. God makes these series, right? We're just preaching the Bible. Just as the Bible dictates the narrative, that's what we're preaching on. But I encourage you that if you do miss a Sunday, that happens. In fact, coming up in a few weeks, I'm going to be on vacation, going to miss a Sunday myself. But I encourage you to make sure that you go online. And just this week, we updated our sermons page on our Facebook. You can go to gracepointlife.com. You can navigate to the menu bar up at the top, go to sermons, and you scroll down. You have a portion there called the Sermon Archive, and that is updated every single week. And Facebook is good, our Vimeo is good, but here's a problem I have with Facebook and Vimeo. They're a little complicated to actually find the video you're looking for. And so on our actual website, these are all organized by our series. Click on the series page, and they're from 1 to 5 or however long. Of course, Daniel right in the middle of this. It'll be updated every single week. So I really encourage you to please, that does take a little bit of work on the back end between Paul and Jonathan and myself, uploading it, getting it on there. But I encourage you to please stay up to date because these messages build on one another. A lot of times, maybe you've missed an application point in what we're talking about that day because you didn't know what we talked about last week. And you can even go online and you can actually find, if you didn't want to watch the message, you can actually just listen to it. We just have the audio file there, so you can listen to it like a podcast or listen to it while you're mowing the lawn, whatever it is. But I encourage you, please stay up to date with these messages, and especially today, because today marks a pretty stark transition from a narrative genre rooted in a historical context to dreams and visions rooted in some yet future historical context. Part of Daniel's complexity and the part of the difficulty when it comes to Daniel is understanding that Daniel is actually a book of two genres. Now, you guys, I like sci-fi. I like Star Wars, I like Star Trek, but imagine if you were watching Star Trek halfway through the season and all of a sudden turns into a historical History Channel documentary. You go from the stars with Klingons and laser beams and beam me up, Scotty, to all of a sudden you're here at planet Earth and there's no electricity and rather than ray guns, you're talking about musket balls, right? I mean, that would be different, wouldn't it? That would be jarring, right? Well, Daniel is that way. Daniel, of course, as you know, is 12 chapters. The first 6 are all stories. That's what we've covered now for 7 weeks. This is officially the longest series that we've had, or one of the longest series that we have, and we're not done. And Daniel is a story that, of the 6 chapters, they're just stories that we went down one by one by one, and then 7 marks a transition from stories to visions. And so we have to change up a little bit. We have to change up how we address the topic of Daniel 7. You see, we move from God's principles rooted in uncertain times to God's principles rooted in the end times. This means that the comprehension and application for Daniel 7 becomes noticeably more difficult, but I promise you, not unattainable. Okay? We're going to get into some deep waters today. Are you guys ready? I assume you're here. If you're online, watching with us, I assume you're watching with us or whenever you are. And so we're getting into some deep stuff today. All right, so you got to follow me as your very incompetent guide as we try to hack our way through the jungle that is Daniel 7. But a few ground rules. As we dive into now this second genre of Daniel 7, I want to lay some ground rules real quick before we dive in. In order that we don't get bogged down by specifics or wade too deep into speculative territory, I'm going to endeavor to stick to what is undoubtedly the main message of Daniel 7. See, the problem with passages in the Bible that talk about visions, you can get off the rails real easy. So I'm going to stick to what's black and white. What is the lesson? And in fact, in Daniel 7, there is a verse that has the lesson, black and white. No matter what you think about visions, no matter what you know about the historical context, it is the lesson of Daniel 7. I'm going to stick to that, okay? A message that upon reading the first time, anyone would have picked up on, okay? Anybody would have read this and seen where we are. As such, I will resist. I'm going to resist the urge to stray into areas that, while interesting, okay, and in themselves beneficial, are nevertheless secondary to the main thrust of the passage of Daniel 7. You see, you got to understand first, what did Daniel 7 mean to Daniel before we can first apply that message to us. And that's where we're going to go. Now, part of the difficulty of interpreting this passage is that it is steeped in bizarre images. How many of you today have ever read Daniel 7 so you know where we're going? Okay, how many of you, no shame, this is your first time in Daniel 7 today? You all are in for a treat. This is going to be good. You're going to love it. I promise you. This is going to be good because guess what? The Bible's weird. The Bible is bizarre, and especially so in Daniel 7. Now, why is that? Because the entire setting, as I said, the genre, but the setting changes from an earthly plane. Daniel 1 through 6 is all about an earthly plane. Where are we in the first half of Daniel? What city? Babylon. Babylon was a real place with real people. We have history to understand a little bit, to help us understand what Daniel 1 through 6 was applying for. Whereas now we move from this very solid, very undeniable earthly plane with a historical context to a metaphysical one, where ideas, principles, and actions are as much a part of the physical world as the ground, the sea, and the air. In these visions, ideas take physical form. I love the Bible. It is really cool. Daniel, and by extension of us, God is trying to teach Daniel and us a very different and distant scenario than the one he and us live in today. In fact, in the course of one vision in Daniel 7, Daniel will not only see the world itself come to an end. Imagine that. He's going to see the world itself come to an end, but he is also going to witness as God sets up his eternal kingdom. The best mode in which God does this is by a dream. Now, how many of you had a weird dream last night? I did, because I had Taco Bell at 10 o'clock at night. Right, in my dream, don't judge me. Don't you judge me. My dreams were a response to maybe less than sanitary food ingestion, right? I mean, the food inside made me see weird things, right? So, but understand, this Daniel 7, he didn't eat something bad, right? He didn't go to Taco Bell in Babylon at 10 p.m., right, at night before going to sleep. These visions were given to him by God. They were a direct revelation, a direct vision from God. But like a dream, does anyone really understand dreams? I mean, how many of you had just a weird recurring dream that though you can kind of understand the basic premise, maybe the flow of it, but it's very vague, isn't it? It's very indiscriminate, right? And this is how Daniel's dreams are also presented. The dreams are there, and God is true, and he's trying to present an undeniable message, which we'll get to in a second, but there are parts of it that are unfocused, they're vague, and this is intentional. There's an aura of mystery and ambiguity because Daniel didn't intend for Daniel and for us to know historical facts. Y'all hear me this morning? Do not come to Daniel, the rest of Daniel chapter 7, particularly trying to look for historical facts. God was not trying to show Daniel historical facts. Now, this is not to say it's deceptive or false in any way. Without a doubt, this vision speaks truly. This vision speaks accurately, but it does not speak precisely, meaning it would be folly for us to press any detail further than whatever is initially presented to us in the context. God, hear me again, God is trying to communicate rather than an earthly historical context, God is trying to communicate a heavenly perspective. You see the difference? Don't come looking for facts. Come looking for a heavenly perspective. So with that said, are you ready to dive in? Here we go. Daniel 7. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream. In the visions of his head while on his bed, then he wrote down the dream telling the main facts. Let's pause just real quick. We're not going to do this with every verse, I promise you. But we're going back in time. We're doing a flashback, if you will. Daniel chapter 7 goes back to the reign of who? What's that guy's name? Belshazzar. Good. Who was the king in Daniel 6? Was it Belshazzar? No, it was Darius, wasn't it? So now we're going back 2 chapters, and not just 2 chapters, 10 years. This is the first reign of Belshazzar. Daniel at this time would have been in his early 70s. And we come here, and history was in turmoil at this time. We know that if this truly is, which we know it is, but if this is Belshazzar's first year in Babylon reigning, we also know at that same time, another foreign power, the Persians, anyone know who the Persians are? They just won a decisive victory over the Medes to make them top dog. Literally, the end of Babylon was spelled that day with Cyrus taking over what is, at that time, one of the greatest kingdoms. Babylon is next on Persians' hit list. So this is the historical background. That's all we're really given, okay? That's all you're going to get today. So what happens? What happens in these dreams? Let's continue reading. Verse 2. Daniel spoke, saying, saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And 4 great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I watched till its wings, though, they were plucked off. And it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. And a man's heart was given to him. Wow, what a weird animal. But there's a second beast, and suddenly another beast, a second like a what? Bear. So we got a lion-eagle thing transforming into a man. Now we got this bear. It was raised up on one side and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and they said thus to it, arise, devour much flesh. Verse 6. After this I looked, and there was another like a what? Man, we're getting all the lions, tigers, bears. We're getting them all, right? We got lions, we got bears, now we got leopards. And this I looked, and there was another like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. And the beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. Weird. Bizarre. Anyone else think the Bible's boring? It can be confusing, let's be honest, but it's not boring. But there's a 4th beast. And after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth, and it was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue, trampling the ground, trampling the dust, that is, with its feet. And it was what, church? Different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I was considering the horns, and all of a sudden there was another horn, a little one, coming up from among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there, in his horn, were eyes like that of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous or proud, boastful words. This 4th beast is weird, isn't it? We're not told what it's likened to, is it? The first one was likened to a lion. The second one was likened to a bear. Third one was likened to a leopard. Here we're not given any likeness. It was just this super mutant beast. But this beast had 10 horns, and then all of a sudden one of those horns started to become more prominent, and 3 horns were ripped out of its forehead, and this one stood proud. And then all of a sudden, it's just not any horn. This horn grows eyes and a mouth, and it starts speaking vile things. What is happening? What is happening? You see, these four beasts, just like the four winds, are they specific kingdoms? And the question I have for you is, should that be the right question we're asking? You see, these four winds, they simply mean that the sea was this churning, violent Mediterranean area. It was about the world. The sea was the world, and it was boisterous, and the four winds were coming in. And we've all seen a storm that was ripped up in the sea by one wind, a hurricane coming in. You will have all experienced that. But imagine if you looked on the side of a sea and all four winds were buffeting you at the same exact time. This was a tumultuous time. The sea itself was a symbol of destruction, raw, unbridled power. It was a threatening force that arrayed itself against the beneficial forces of creation. And here we have this sea, and what does it produce? Beasts, ugly, grotesque beasts. Now, with the possible exception of the second, that was the bear, all these are hybrid or mutant beasts comprised of different parts and different animals. And to our modern Western sensibilities, this may invoke some level of awe or wonder. If you're like me, I like science fiction. I mean, hybrid beasts in any video game, they're the most powerful, right? They got stats at the wazoo, right? They are strong. You look at TV shows or movies, it's just something that's normal for us to see in front of us in some way, fantasy way of these kind of weird beast things. But would a Jew hearing this or thinking about this or imagining this, would their response be awe and amazement and kind of a little bit of wonderment? No, actually. It would be disgust. They would look at these beasts and hear these descriptions, and they would be horrified. Daniel and his contemporaries, they would have been appalled. These creatures were bastardizations of God's creation. And while undoubtedly powerful and imposing, they were subpar and defective. You see, though we as humans kind of like to move the parts around, I'm going to give this bear a robot arm. I'm going to give it wings so it can fly, and I'm going to give it laser beams out of its eyes. Like that part of fantasy, we can look at that and kind of chuckle to ourselves. But in reality, God's designs are perfect from day one. And for a Jew to hear these kind of monstrous mutations, they would have been horrified. Daniel, as we're going to talk about his response, was horrified. So, but now the big question is, what king and kingdoms do these beasts represent? And here we must proceed with not only caution, but also brevity. I went long this morning, so I'm going to be quick in this part. You see, while there is some benefit in gaming out the possible historical identities, we're not told enough details and specifics in the immediate context to say with full assurance who these beasts represent, but the only exception possibly being of the first one. All the rest are quite a mystery to us. And the first one is, most commentators, and even within our own context, believe it's Babylon, and particularly Nebuchadnezzar under Babylon, because he was a lion with wings. He was ferocious and fast. But all of a sudden, this lion turned into a man, didn't it? It was given the heart of a man. Does anyone remember a story in Daniel where a king, Nebuchadnezzar, was turned into a beast, but then turned back into a beast, turned into a beast, but then turned back into a man? So most people agree that most likely that lion figure is Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar. But what about the other ones? And at this point, it's difficult to pinpoint certainty of who these beasts are. Should these four beasts follow in some way a historical track, beginning with Babylon, that would mean that the bear was Midian. Then after that, the leopard would be Persia, and then after Persia would be Greece. But there's equal size to say, well, No, the bear was probably a combination of the Media-Persian alliance, and then the leopard was Greece, and then this super beast was Rome to come later. But here's the thing. Listen, there are good men whom I respect, books I have in my office, people personally that I know and love dearly, who know, let me once again reiterate, who know this book better than I do, disagree on the identities of these four beasts. You see, because is it historical? Or maybe these are some future event. Maybe it's not Babylon. Maybe it's not Persia. Maybe it's not Greece or Rome. Maybe it's Daniel was just seeing way so into the future that we have no identities, firm historical identities for who these people are. So what are we left to do? If we don't know with a certainty who these are, does that mean that we stop reading? Remember what I told you? This was a dream, right? Some facts are purposefully left vague. We're not told in the context who this is, who these are, right? So what are we to do? Do we close up? Are we to close up the book, stop reading because we can't understand every little detail contained within? The answer is no. No. Clearly, and once again, let me reiterate my point from the introduction. God is not communicating historical facts in these passages. So don't go looking for something, i.e., historical facts, in a clearly symbolic passage which is meant to convey something else. God is trying to communicate not historical facts, but a what, church? A heavenly perspective. That is far more important than the details of the history surrounding these animals. Principles, then these heavenly principles, these heavenly perspectives that no matter the historical context still hold true today as they did then and will continue to in the future. So, we're not going to get bogged down, are we? That was a little bit lengthy thing, right? But I need to get us in the proper mind because something happens to these beasts. And if we labor too long at trying to determine who these beasts are, we're going to miss the point of Daniel 7. Do you guys want to miss the point of Daniel 7? No. So let's continue reading. Verse 9. I watched till thrones were set in place in the Ancient of Days. What a great Old Testament term to refer to God. And the Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool, and his throne was a fiery flame. Its wheels a burning fire. One theologian called this the God-mobile. He's got this chariot, or he's got some, why didn't Daniel call it a chariot? He knew what chariots were, I have no idea. But regardless, this is the God-mobile. He's got this throne with wheels on it. A fiery stream, though, issued and came forth from before him. 1,000 ministered to him. How many is that? 1,000 thousands. Good. Thank you, Mr. John, our mathematician. How about 10,000 times 10,000, John? A lot. Let's just say, is there more of them than there are more of the four beasts? Yeah, a ton. But then we're told that the court was seated and books were open. Hold on a second. Weren't we just by a seaside? Didn't we just witness these four mutant beasts coming out of the water on the shores? And then all of a sudden, now we're in a courtroom with God on his God-mobile and all of these millions of attendants around him. What is happening right now? The Bible's weird, and I love the Bible. And I watched then, because of the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking, I watched till the beast, the fourth beast, was slain. Its body destroyed and given to the burning flame. As for the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. You see, the scene changes. As we pointed out, the sea changes. The scene of these visions changes from a chaotic seaside with horrendous creatures emerging from the bulging waters, vicious, violent, loud, to all of a sudden, we're now in a courtroom, a pristine, orderly courtroom where everyone has a seat, and God is at the head. There we see God, the Ancient of Days, seated with millions of his attendants around him. The description we're given of God is not a literal one, of course, as I've talked about many times here. Does God have a physical form? The answer is no. Even when we get to heaven, we're never going to see a physical form of God. He is a spirit. So any descriptions, any physical descriptions we find of God in the Old Testament are what is known as a theophany, meaning that while descriptions given may be literal when they're attributed to us, they are metaphorical when they're attributed to God, since God has no observable form. Hence, these descriptions are not indicative, again, of historical facts. Are we supposed to come away from this scene thinking that God has a Godmobile, that he has white clothes and white hair? Is that what we're supposed to draw from here? No. God, and by extension Daniel, seeing this, is trying to describe to us principles, not historical characteristics or physical characteristics. So what do these characteristics mean? And again, I could go on. My goodness. I was just talking with Jonathan about this. My goodness, time is almost gone. Real quick, I'm not going to go way into here. If you want my notes after this, I will give them to you so you can go study on your own. But what do these physical descriptions of God represent? What are the principles that God is trying to show us and Daniel trying to tell us? His garments, white like snow, speak of God's righteousness. His hair, white like pure wool. We got some older folks in here, Mr. John, and I love you, Brian, but you're a little bit older, buddy. And you got a graying of the hair, a little bit of a white. Mr. Steve, same thing. It's just that happens to guys and anybody growing up, unless you can dye it. But typically, gray hair, though in our generation, sometimes, I don't know why, but some people are just ashamed of it. You shouldn't be. It means that you've lived a good long life. And also, in the Old Testament, it's indicative of wisdom. Typically, the ones who have lived the longest and have the grayest hair probably have a little bit of wisdom. Can we all agree? And so here's God. He's got white clothes and he's got white hair, not gray hair. White. He is the most wise being in all the world. But then you got his fiery Godmobile. What is this? These represent God's power. Fire is both destructive and constructive, isn't it? Fire can destroy a house, but if left in a controlled environment, can warm a house. And here's God. He has fire at his literal fingertips. He can do whatever he wants. He has unbridled, unmatched power. He has so much power that God strips the beast of their own power and then burns the fourth without so much as a battle. Was there a battle? Have we read about a battle? But we saw these gruesome animals coming up out of the water, didn't we? And there was no battle. God set up his courtroom, pronounced judgment, and then had a barbecue with this fourth beast. There was no battle. Throughout Daniel's account, we have noted how God's hidden hand of sovereignty sovereignly orchestrated history itself. In Daniel's 1 through 6, we see God behind the scenes, moving Nebuchadnezzar, moving Belshazzar, moving Darius the king, all around the playing field. But now here, in vivid imagery, in vivid detail, we see God at the center stage exacting his power, his sovereign will on these wicked kingdoms. And here, it is open and grand display, just easily dispatching his adversaries. Now, when I was growing up as a kid, I would go to Sunday school, and I would think in my head, just like any comic book or superhero, that for every good guy, there is his nemesis. You got Batman and Joker, Superman and Lex Luthor, Even in Star Trek, you got the Federation, you got the Klingons. You go down the line. Star Wars, you got the light side, the dark side, you got the rebels, you got the Empire. And typically, because they're good stories, there's conflict there. And oftentimes, there's equal conflict. That's what makes a story good, is good, equally based conflict. And so when I grew up, I would hear stories on Sunday morning, and I would think the devil's the bad guy, which is right. Jesus is the good guy, which is also right. But then I thought that they were equally matched, which is not right. Every time God goes toe to toe with the devil, with sin, with wickedness in the Bible, wickedness does not have a chance. In this courtroom scene, you see these beasts coming out, and then God setting up his courtroom scene, and then he exacts judgment, and then there's death. There is death. Indeed, this is not a battle between equals, but more akin to a boot crushing an ant. The Bible's cool, isn't it? But the scene doesn't stop there. Another person, another entity, another individual enters the scene. Let's continue reading. Verse 13. I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man. This passage in Daniel is in Aramaic, but the Aramaic and Hebrew are cousin languages, so they often share the same words with one another. And this word for Son of Man is the Hebrew word and Aramaic word Adam, which is the Hebrew word for humanity. Why do you think Adam is called Adam? Because he was the first what? Human man. He was the first human. And so here in this grand courtroom scene, when you have the Ancient of Days up here, these beasts over here, one is on a burning fiery spigot, and then all of a sudden you have this man, one like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days. They brought him near before him. Then to him, not to the Ancient of Days, to the Adam character, to the Son of Man character, to this human-like one, to him was given what, church? Three things. Dominion, glory, and a kingdom. That all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom, the one which shall not be destroyed. What a perplexing individual this is, isn't it? What a strange character we now have come on the scene. He not only has the appearance of a man, which is the pinnacle of God's creation, but surprisingly, his mode of transportation are what? Let's go back. One passage. I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man coming with the what? Clouds. He's coming on the clouds. God has a Godmobile, but this Son of Man has a Cloudmobile. Here he is coming in the clouds. Old Testament, just spoiler alert, again, we don't have time to go down this rabbit hole, but in the Old Testament, you want to know the only person, the only being who ever rides on the clouds in the Old Testament? God. But wait a second, God's already in the room, and he's seated. He's on his fiery throne. Who is this guy? Furthermore, the mystery man does not seat himself among the other millions of attendants, does he? Does he take a seat with the millions that are around? No. He approaches the throne of God. Is he going to be destroyed? Is he going to be put down? Is he prideful? Is this what we're supposed to get? No. Instead of God striking this man-likeness person down, he instead bestows on the Son of Man, which should only be God's purview. What are the three things that he has given? Dominion, glory, and a kingdom. I'm sorry, those are only God's. What in the world is God doing? For centuries, Bible nerds, Bible geeks debated on who the identity of who this person is. And in fact, pre-first century, pre-New Testament, the most popular theory was that it's Moses. I could go into detail on why that is. Makes sense. But they thought it was Moses or some other mystery figure yet to be revealed. But you want to know something? The New Testament could not be more clear on who this second, apparently divine person is. Anybody want to guess? It's a Sunday school answer. Anybody want to guess who this person is? Hey! Everyone give yourself a round of applause. You get a gold star, you get a cookie, right? Come find Miss Mitzi after the service. She will give you a prize. That is right. It's Jesus. Did you know that Jesus' favorite term to refer to himself in the New Testament was not the Messiah? We always say Jesus Christ, which is like saying Jesus Messiah, the anointed one. But did you know that Jesus never once referred to himself as the Messiah? You want to know what he referred to himself? You want to know what his favorite identity, the term that he used most to describe himself, you want to know what it is? Son of Man. Way to go, Miss Chris. Son of Man. And it's all throughout the New Testament. And he gets that term not only because he's Jesus, he's the Word incarnate, but he also gets that term because it's used in not only Ezekiel and Jeremiah, but Daniel 7. And in fact, Jesus, speaking to Bible nerds like I am today, also quoted from Daniel 7. You guys want to read it together? This is a little bit of a tangent, but it's worth it. You ready? Follow me down the hole as I go. Mark chapter 14. This passage is also found in Matthew chapter 26. But Mark chapter 14, where this is all about the kangaroo court that was set up to convict Jesus of treason. And did Jesus ever do anything wrong? No. Not even in a legal sense. Never once broke one Roman law or spiritual law. But nonetheless, they put up a court to condemn him. Beginning of Mark 14 is all about how they brought in these witnesses and they tried to level against Jesus false claims. But you want to know what happens when two liars get in a room? Their stories don't match up. And so they were thrown out. So here stands Jesus. He's right in the middle. And like they're all trying to say, he's a bad guy, you shouldn't listen to him, yada, yada, yada. And Jesus doesn't say a word. And it's getting the religious leaders a little frustrated. And so we read in Mark chapter 14, the high priest stood up in the midst and asked Jesus, saying, "Do you answer nothing? What is it these men testify against you?" But he kept silent, answered nothing. Again, the high priest asked him, now the chips are on the table, asked him point blank, "Are you the Christ?" That is, are you the Messiah? Are you the anointed one, the Son of the Blessed, the Son of God? Are you that one? And Jesus is like, fine, it's time for me to talk. You have all had your fun. Now I have the floor. Thank you for giving me such a great introduction, O Caiaphas. What does Jesus say? Jesus said, I am. And you will see the what, church? Son of Man. So he affirms he's the Messiah, doesn't he? But he also affirms he's the Son of Man character. And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power and coming with the clouds of heaven. What scene, what chapter of the Bible is Jesus drawing from? Daniel 7, where the Son of Man, a human-like figure, comes riding what? Clouds. And he tells them, I'm that one. Hi. Wasn't Moses. It was me. But then he says, you will see the Son of Man sitting. Okay, so go back to Daniel 7. In our context, there's really only three parties involved here. You got God on the throne. You got the attendants, the million of attendants surrounding the throne. And then you got the beasts over here. And so if they were seeing the Son of Man, in our context, were the Sanhedrin, was the religious leaders in Jesus' reference, were they the attendants around the throne room of God? No. Right? Because they were the enemies of God, weren't they? They were trying to seek, kill, and destroy the Son of God. So they're not the attendants of Daniel 7, and they're definitely not God. So what group does that leave? The beasts. You see what Jesus is saying? Oh, religious leaders, you think you are great. You think you are a part of the courtroom of God, but you are beasts. You are beasts who will see and have seen the Son of Man coming on cloud and in his glory. That's not the message today. That's a lot, though, isn't it? But remember, I promised you something from the beginning, that we would interpret Daniel 7 in light of what Daniel knew. And did Daniel know who that figure was? No. We have the benefit, 2,000 years of history and coming after the New Testament, so we know who that figure is. But Daniel didn't. And you see, and right now, I could go off on a tangent now. I could talk about how Jesus is the Son of God. Man, we could end this service now on a high. But Daniel was a different character and had a different reaction to what he saw. Daniel 7, let's continue reading. I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit within my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. Hold on a second. He just saw the beasts get defeated, didn't he? You all read it. He saw these 3-4 beasts die. Or, well, not die, but the one died. The other two were stripped of their power. You saw God set up his throne, his kingdom. You should be happy, Daniel. But instead, he's what, church? Troubled and grieved. Verse 16, I came near to one of those who stood by and asked him the truth of all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. Remember when I told you that black and white, Daniel 7 has an application that you cannot miss. This is it. Those great beasts, this interpreter says, those great beasts which are four kings which arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and ever and evermore. Period. Daniel is like that kid in the back of the class. I need more information, please. Teacher, please explain to me more. And so he presses this interpreter a little bit more. Then I wish to know the truth about the fourth beast, which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, with its teeth of iron and its nails of bronze, which devoured, broke in pieces, and trampled the residue, the dust, with the feet. And the 10 horns, tell me more about the horns, he says, were on its head, and how that one horn which came up, before which fell, and namely that horn which had eyes and a mouth and spoke pompous words, prideful words, boastful words, whose appearance was greater than his fellows. Tell me about them. And how I was watching, and the same horn was making war against the saints and prevailing against them, until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was made in favor of the saints of the Most High, and the time came for the saints to possess the kingdom. This is all Daniel speaking. He's like, okay, great. Thank you for giving me the application of these visions. Can you tell me a little bit more? Tell me more about this fourth beast. Tell me more about this horn that comes out of his head and starts to speak vile things. And he gets his answer. The fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all other kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, trample it, break it in pieces. The 10 horns are 10 kings who shall arise from this kingdom, and another shall rise after them, and he shall be different from the first ones, and shall subdue then 3 kings. And he shall speak pompous, again, prideful, boastful words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High. He shall he shall intend to change the times and law. Then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and times and a half. But the court shall be seated, and shall take away his dominion to consume and destroy it forever. He says, look, you know what? This beast, fourth beast, is going to rip and tear and devour the saints of the Most High. And that's discouraging. But while he's doing that, God is setting up his courtroom. And when he adjures the court, brings it in, he pronounces judgment. and judgment is swift. Verse 27, then the kingdom and dominion, the greatness of the kingdoms of the whole heaven, shall be given to the people, the saints of the Most High. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. This is the end of the account. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts, they greatly troubled me, and my countenance changed, but I kept the matter in my heart. What a Debbie Downer. Why was Daniel so discouraged? You see, if I went off on that Jesus tangent, we would have never got to this. We would have left this morning a little encouraged, but I'm sad to say you may leave this morning a little discouraged, because Daniel was. So far in our story, we've been left every chapter on a note of victory and hope. Daniel 1, Daniel 2, Daniel 3, 4, 5, and 6 all ended on a positive note, and here we have this sour note. Why? Why? You want to know why? Has Jesus come back? Has he fully exerted his throne on this earth? No. You see, this vision is still yet to be fulfilled even in our time. Jesus still is yet to come again to set up his earthly kingdom and his earthly dominion. So that means that we are living not in the time of Jesus, though that is partially true. We are living during the times of the beasts. This is why Daniel was discouraged. This is why he was troubled. And I dare say, so should we. See, what's the takeaway this morning? How are we supposed to take Daniel 7 and apply it to our lives? See, this is a point to where me as a pastor, typically I like to bring in application and say, go and do likewise. Typically, we always get it from the passage. Be like Jesus. When you go out in the world, be like Paul. And for the past 7 weeks, I kept telling you, be like Daniel and his 3 friends, basically. But here, we don't have an application. Here, we're left not with a go and do likewise, but rather a listen, observe, and know. The takeaway this morning is not a go and do something. The takeaway this morning is I want you to know something. Can I do that? And what is it I want you to know? And what is this Daniel 7? What is it trying to tell you? That apart from God, humanity becomes a deformed and dysfunctional subspecies destined for destruction. Here we come to the difficult part of our passage and understanding that could Daniel do anything to change the circumstances of his vision? And the answer is no. He was a bystander. The only one with any power was God. And God allowed Daniel to see what humanity becomes when they run from God. When they become images of themselves rather than God. King and kingdoms, man and men, person and people who are uncontrolled by God and driven by their own barbaric urges become mutant beasts. A subpar creation that is not only self-destructive, but is ultimately insubordinate to the creative order. The first, man's kingdoms, exalt themselves above their fellow man, and then they seek to exalt themselves above God. But God will have the last word in both regards. though kingdoms rage and are brutal and morph and change with increasing more gruesomeness, God will have the last word. This passage strips back the thin veneer, exposing all human kingdoms. Human kingdoms put up a pretty impressive facade, don't they? They look pretty great. America even. But understand this, you know what Daniel 7? Daniel 7 strips away the costume. And be it Babylon or first century Rome or 18th century Europe or World War II Germany or even modern day America, this passage strips away that costume to reveal that all earthly kingdoms are monsters. All of them. They're barbaric. They exalt themselves above the created order. Jesus willingly, though, laid down his life before the beast. Didn't he? God allowed these things to happen. And rather than Jesus coming, who could have come? He was the one like the Son of Man. He could have came with destruction. He had millions upon millions, as the song goes, 10,000 times 10,000. He had millions at his disposal, but yet he did not come to seek and destroy. He didn't come with a sword. He came to seek and save. He stood in the gap between the beast of mankind and the divine and took the blunt of the cross. This beast came out and gorged our Jesus. Put him on a throne built to look like a wooden cross. Put a crown of thorns on his head and pronounced him king. Jesus acquired his throne not through bloody conquest, but through a bloody cross. And without Jesus, man becomes beast. For those of us caught in between like Daniel, it's our job to remain faithful despite how gruesome the world gets. For though there may be what seems to be a never-ending line of newer and greater and more horrible beasts coming and devouring mankind, there is an end coming. God will have the last word. You see, the reason why we need to leave here a little bit melancholy, a little bit troubled, is because we are living in the age of the beast. God has inaugurated his kingdom when he came and died. He did. And he secured his earthly reign here when in 3 days later he what? Rose from the grave. You see, Jesus destroyed that day not an earthly kingdom, not an earthly beast, but a beast that had its teeth stuck into humanity since day one. A beast named death, whose teeth were sharp, who always found its victim. Jesus bore that beast, allowed that beast to devour him, and Jesus came out victorious 3 days later. Jesus came victorious over the beast of death itself. And he does so for you. But here we are. Jesus has yet to come. There is still a second coming when Jesus will not return by way of a manger, but return by way of the clouds. But until then, we live in troubled times. We live in times where the beasts of humanity run rampant. And so we're troubled. And we're discouraged, but understand this, it's not wrong to be discouraged. It's not wrong to be troubled like Daniel was troubled. But in your troubled heart, remember that God will have the last word. That though mankind rages on, God is still in control. God will still make sure that righteousness and justice will outlast wickedness. Though the beasts may try and convince you to forget your identity, Daniel chapter 1. Though the beasts may threaten you with the fiery furnace if you do not comply, Daniel chapter 2. Daniel chapter 3. Though the beasts may conspire to have you thrown to your death, since you pose a threat to their power, Daniel chapter 6. Though the beast rages against us as the saints of the Most High, though the beast may ravage us and our children and our children's children, may we in every age, in every season, in every era remain faithful to the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Because he, not them, he will have the last word. Father, I love you. I thank you, Father, now for this message that you place upon my heart. Lord, as I prayed in the first service, I now pray again. God, I am troubled. God, I am fearful for my church. I'm fearful for my kids. I'm fearful that, God, the beasts that freely roam this world may devour some of our loved ones. But God, I pray that we would not soon be removed from the reality that, God, you are still in control. That, God, you really will have the last day. No matter how dark and how gruesome our world gets, you are so much greater. I love you, my Jesus. I thank you for this day. I pray that, God, if it so be your will, that you would continue to inhibit the beasts of our country. I love you. I thank you so much. In your name we pray. Amen.